Now, on a Tuesday night, we like to talk about books and all thing to do with literature. And over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about how you get a book published and how you go about writing, researching, all that kind of thing. Well, we're going to talk this evening to Dave Lewis, who's a well-renowned musical author and journalist and runs a website as well dedicated to the group Led Zeppelin. Well, I've been talking to Dave about how he goes about the whole process of putting together a book.
Vic Morgan.
Dave, thank you very much indeed for joining us on The Late Show. It's great to have your company. Happy birthday, by the way.
For last week, thank you very much.
And as somebody who's 55 already, it's not too bad apart from the aches.
But you're only as young as you feel.
Indeed so.
That's all I say.
Now, let's talk about what you do first and foremost. We should say, and I've got a bit of a personal interest in this, because you do deal with a certain group called Led Zeppelin, who many people might have heard of. And you are the founder of a magazine called Tight But Loose, aren't you?
Indeed I am, yeah. I've been writing about Led Zeppelin since 1977. The magazine first came out in 78, self-produced it. Very luckily for me, the band thought it was good, and I had some amazing access during those sort of latter years of the band. And it's just gone on from there. And on from there, I've written, obviously, various books on Zeppelin, and sort of culminated in the recent ones that I've done on Led Zeppelin, Knebworth, and obviously the recently published Feather in the Wind Over Europe 1980. So, I've been doing this for some time.
Yeah, that was a historic tour, which we'll get on to when we talk about the book in a little while.
Sure.
Now, the whole process of putting a book together, we've done the local history kind of thing, but I thought it'd be interesting to talk about how you get a music book put together. The first thing that you have to get right is your research, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, obviously my books are very much based, on the music and on the sort of history of the band. Obviously, because I've been into it for so long, I have a bank of material which obviously I've logged over many years. So when it came to the Europe book, I had already amassed quite a lot of research sort of material, lots of pictures. I've been sort of chipping away for a while at it because it was a book that I knew eventually I was going to get around to doing. I was lucky enough to be on that tour. And I'd already previously written about it quite extensively. But what I did initially, I guess, was just to amass what I'd got and then sort of mapped it out into a sort of chapter content. And I was very keen to tell, the whole story as much as I could do, very much from my point of view, plus obviously capture the times and what was going on, which was, quite a difficult period for Led Zeppelin. So the research came first, yeah.
And then you have to go about getting this thing published. Now, there are various ways to get book published. And your first book, you did the Knebworth one, as you've said. You also researched one, quite an extensive thing to put together of all the live dates that they ever did. That was something, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, my history in terms of what I've written over Zeppelin, the first book I did was 1983 called The Final Acclaim. It wasn't the final acclaim by any means. Again, I think what I was trying to do there was trying to put all the best bits that I'd done in the magazine. I then did a book in 1991 called Led Zeppelin: A Celebration, which was, again, something I felt was really quite a gap in the market for a real good reference book on every aspect of their music. Again, for me, it's obviously about the music and not the sex, drugs and rock and roll, which has gone on. But, the sort of fan base that I've got are obviously people that are into the music. So, yeah, I did that, and then that led on to doing this book on every live day. And again, I had, for many, many years, looked at that sort of project. That came out in 1997, and then I did a second edition in 2004. So, I'd worked with major publishers on those. So when it came to doing the Knebworth book 2 years ago, I decided I'd do it myself. It was a bit into the unknown, because, I'd never done that. And what you have to do is obviously search out the market. Obviously, I've got my website, which is what I wanted to sell the books through. You've got various options. You can go down, the Amazon route. You can try and look for distribution, but obviously, in terms of costing, that obviously takes away quite a lot of the profit margin. So, if you're brave enough, and I think you do have to be quite brave enough to step out there on your own, it is a good thing. The other thing I would say about the books that I've done, that I've self-published, is that, I've got total control over them. So they have appeared exactly as the way I wanted them to. I wouldn't say working, with a third party has always been that way. You know, that can be quite frustrating. You've got the ideas and you know what you're trying to say and how you want to say it, but it doesn't always get designed in the right way, etc. So, you know, to have total control in what I've done with the Type of Loose publishing books has been, you know, really good, and I would certainly recommend that to anyone who was setting up in that way.
A bit like the band, really, total artistic control.
Well,
Very
yeah,
good.
there's a parallel without a doubt.
Yeah, but when you first go to a publisher, then do you knock on the door and you say, "Look, I've got a book about Led Zeppelin"? They go, "Oh yeah." Do you face much scepticism?
Well, yeah. I mean, I can tell you, I've got a framed letter, a rejection letter from a certain publisher in 1988 who said Led Zeppelin don't sell books anymore because they don't really sell records. The sort of artists we're interested are the ones that sell concert tickets, and I think they quoted Bon Jovi. You know, nothing wrong with Bon Jovi, but it was made to look as though Led Zeppelin was a dinosaur act. That was it ever going to happen? How long they were? Because obviously, in the wake of Live Aid and then lots of bands beginning to cite them as influences, and then the remasters coming out. So yeah, I think. Certainly years ago, certainly in the mid-'80s when the Zepp thing, you know, did go a little bit quiet, publishers were pretty reticent. But I kept knocking on the door because I knew the idea that I had was really solid. In fact, as luck would have it, when Omnibus Press took Celebration, my first major book, that was when Jimmy was doing the remaster, so the book came out literally at the same time. So I was very lucky because all of that obviously threw up a whole new sort of generation of listeners to Led Zeppelin. So that was a kickstart, and that was in, as I say, 1991. And from then on in, it's been no looking back because they are just one of the iconic bands. You know, influenced so many musicians, continue to. I also think the catalogue is as fresh today as when it was recorded many years ago. That's one of the things I think that keeps people coming back to Zeppelin. And there's a story to be told in lots of niche ways. And again, as I said, being part of that Europe tour when I saw 5 dates, it was great to be able to put that into words. And what you're trying to do is take people to back to those times and let them experience what it was like, because it was quite an incredible thing. I was only 22, 23, and I was in the midst of the Led Zeppelin world. And it was incredible, really. So certainly the Europe book is as much my story is about exactly what went on, for them.
I mean, there's a lot of mythology. I'm sure some is true, some isn't true. And for those of us who, I mean, you have a captive market in respect, don't you? Because if you see the words Led Zeppelin on the front of the magazine, if you're a fan, or you see a book with that on the front, you tend to get it. Some books are good, some books are not quite so good. There is that grey area with some literature about the band, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. I mean, I think obviously Zeppelin have been well served with books now. It is a creaking bookshelf, without a doubt. There's been lots of large format photo books. There's been obviously books about them on the road. That and you've got to look. How many books do you need, if you like? But I think with my books, because they're very niche and they're very targeted towards, obviously, Zeppelin fans, there is a market for it. And I think that you've got to have a good idea. And I think the series that I'm doing, I've got various other ideas, in the future for other things, in areas that, I could certainly put a book together about. So, having done the Knebworth, we've moved to Europe, there's scope to do more. But I think what I would say about my books, they're done with integrity and they're done as accurately as they can be, because again, Zeppelin have been well served with a lot of misrepresentation of what went on, and rumour almost becomes fact, and what did happen and when gets very blurred. The sort of thing that I do, I would like to say, puts the record straight. So again, if you go to the Knebworth book or you go to the Europe book, you're going to find out exactly what went on, because I'm a man who doesn't like to get things wrong when it comes to Led Zeppelin.
Well, there are plenty of people who put you right, I guess, aren't there?
Well, they would do, yeah. I mean, again, I've almost, sort of forgotten as much as I've sort of remembered. Yeah. And there is a whole network of, websites and message boards. People analyse it incredibly detailed. So I would soon be told if I had got it wrong. But I like to think that, by and large, it does come out well. And certainly the response to both those books, has been fantastic.
And the move to self-publishing, I mean, it is a very brave move. You also had a full-time job to wrestle with as well whilst you were doing all this, didn't you?
Yeah, I was in music retail for 35 years, and, loved every minute of it. And it was great to, combine that with doing the Zeppelin thing on the side. But 2 or 3 years ago, when I got made redundant, I had to say to myself, what do I want to do and how do I want to do it? And I felt that if I spent more time cultivating the Zeppelin thing, it could work. And so far, so good. The whole thing is about reaching people and, distribution and people knowing where you are. So, it's very much that I'm pointing people towards our website to buy the books. But, yeah, it's great now that I can concentrate, and I do various other freelance stuff, for magazines like Record Collector. I've just done a major feature on The Who. So, it's great that I can be in the middle of it and certainly concentrate it, because these books do need a lot of concentration to be done right. And again, certainly with the Europe book, that was like, 2 years of sort of amassing the material and then 6 months non-stop writing and making sure it was right. And again, as I say, I'm involved in every aspect, from putting it together, through writing it, researching it, making sure the layout's right. I work with a fantastic guy who does the layout, but, I'm very much sort of hands-on in how it's going to look. And I had a preconception of what I wanted the Europe book to look like, and it's great to say the book that ended up is exactly what I wanted, and it had the right feel. So, yeah, it's very busy, it's very hectic in terms of doing that, and you've got to be pretty self-motivated to do it. But, the response to it is fantastic, and, if you can, make, people go back to the music with a fresh sort of perspective, that's what I'm trying to do, with integrity, and, and I think that builds a reputation. So if people know that my name's, connected with it, it's going to be good quality.
We'll talk about the new book in just a moment, if that's all right with you.
That's
and we're talking to Dave Lewis about how to get a book published, how to write a book into self-publishing and all that kind of thing. OK, let's talk to Dave Lewis then, continuing about getting into books and how you write and get books published. And Dave has been the author of several books about the rock group Led Zeppelin. Let's talk to him about his latest now, about the tour of Europe in 1980.
Vic Morgan.
Our guest on the programme tonight is Dave Lewis, who is, about as respected an author on the subject of Led Zeppelin as they possibly could be. Dave, the interest in the band, of course, reached new heights a few years back when they got together again at the O2. Sadly, without John Bonham, the anniversary of his passing is with us very shortly.
Indeed.
So there you are. You've got a new interest in the band. Some 20 million people apply for a very small amount of tickets. You and I were both lucky enough to be there that night.
Indeed, we were.
One of the great nights,
It
really.
was.
So how do you go about putting this book together about the group's last tour? Now, this, we didn't know it at the time, was to be quite a historic moment, wasn't it?
It's a very interesting period for Led Zeppelin because, there was a lot of changes in, the musical climate. Punk rock had come in, new wave had come in, new wave of, British heavy metal with bands like, Def Leppard, Iron Maiden. So, they were being challenged. They'd been at the top for a long time. They played Knebworth, which did draw a huge crowd and, by and large had gone very well. But the problem they'd got was what to do next. And I think, their manager, Peter Grant, felt that by going to Europe, they would be out of the spotlight a bit and they could do a tour because they hadn't played a proper tour for 4 years. So, I think going to Europe and doing that was going to set them up for an American tour, which would have happened in, October, November. So it was a very changing time, and it was a very different Led Zeppelin that played those Europe days because they cut out a lot of the excess. There was no lasers, there was no light show, big light show. There was no Moby Dick, there was no Dazed and Confused. It was a much sharper perception of what they could be, and it was almost like a rejuvenation. I think they felt that they were a band again, and they could now go to America and they could continue in a new decade, which, I think they felt with all the backlash and the press that had gone on, they felt that was going to be difficult. But, on those dates, they played 14 dates, and by and large, it went very well. They were a bit rusty. They hadn't played a tour for a long time. But when it was good, it was as good as it had, sort of been. So I think they came off that tour rejuvenated and feeling that they could go into a new decade. The fact that 3 months later, John Bonham died and it stopped, in its prime, is quite a fascinating thing because there was never, a number 2 Led Zeppelin album. It was always number 1, and they stopped at the top. The only thing I would say, I think, because of when it happened, which was the end of 1980, when they actually decided to announce they were going to disband, which was at the end of 1980, that news story got overshadowed by the death of John Lennon, the murder of John Lennon, and it's quite funny that quite strange that period going into 81, Zeppelin became pretty unfashionable, really. It was weird how that story almost got buried, through the Lennon death, and I do explain that in the actual book. But after a while, people realised that Led Zeppelin was going to be an iconic thing, and, it has gone on, ever since. But the period of Europe is a great, fascinating period for Led Zeppelin fans, because it's almost, as I, sort of tagged it, the tour that time forgot. It was very much, not many people went out there. There was no press coverage. It was just a weird period where they'd been at the top for so long, and now were they going to be challenged? Well, they were, but they were responding to that challenge. And I think there would have been a whole new era for Led Zeppelin, had John not died. And it was quite fascinating to see that, unfold, being right there at that time.
I guess also they were getting older, more mature, so, the maybe the excess of previous days was a thing of the past. I mean, you were on that tour, was there the evidence that maybe they were more serious about the music? They were always serious about the music, for goodness sake, but you take the point I'm making.
Yeah, I think Led Zeppelin had suffered a lot of, hardship, particularly Robert Plant. He'd had a car crash in 75, which took them off the road. And then, very tragically, his son died, his 6-year-old son died when they were on tour in 77. So I think he, above anyone, had become tired of, of that non-stop tour album. And I think, very much they were trying to get a strategy that evaded that. So the idea was to do short tours, like the Europe one was 2 weeks. They were going to go to the States in November, and they were going to do 4 weeks and then come back and then do a bit more. So I think there was a change in how the tours were going to be run and exactly how, they could cope with that. But, yeah, no doubt about it, they had been around a long time. Jimmy Page, he's pretty well known. He'd had his drug problems. John Bonham, was very homesick and didn't like being away for long periods. So, yeah, they were growing up. There's no doubt about it. It wasn't, the spontaneity that they had in the early 70s where they just went out and did it, because they did it. They were getting older, as you say. I think that's a good point. And trying to find a way forward. I think there would have been solo albums. I think they would have spun off and done sort of different things, but then come back together, a bit like, sort of Genesis did in the 80s. So I think that would have happened, but no doubt about it, it was a change in time. But again, as I say, it's almost what could have been. It could have been a whole new era for them, but part of the fascination is, that we're never going to know.
What may well have been.
Indeed.
Obviously, the book is out now. People can get hold of it via the TBL website. That's Tight But Loose website, can't they?
Yeah, the website, they can go straight to the website, www.tblweb.com, and all the ordering details are there. My magazine also, it's just coming out, my new issue. I do 3 issues a year, and that's about to run next week. So, plenty to buy on there. And as I say, the interest in it is just, quite amazing. There were young kids that weren't even born when I was on that tour that are just fascinated by Led Zeppelin. And I think, as long as people listen to music, they will always listen to Led Zeppelin. It's very much in the present tense, even though it's a band, that haven't been around for 30 years. It just seems to live and breathe in so many different ways. Lots of tribute bands are out there, and their legacy is just there. And again, even what they're doing now, you've got John Paul Jones has just done a tour with C6 Steve, and Robert Plant with the band of Joy had great success. I'm certain that, at one point Jimmy Page is going to come out with new music. And obviously you talked about, the night of the O2, which just proved beyond doubt that they were this amazing thing. The fact that they could come back for one night only, and they had a lot to lose that night.
Yeah, very much
Their
so.
reputation was on the line firmly, but to come out and exceed the expectation, I thought it was going to be good because they'd rehearsed, and I knew the set was, going to be tight, and they really had worked at it, but it looked and felt so right. And yeah, I think obviously Jason did a fantastic job being in there, and it could have gone on, but for one night only, it just proved again that, Led Zeppelin, their legacy is assured, and I think that night proved it.
I was going to say there that as a fan you just wanted it to be good, didn't you? You didn't want it to be bad. I think the first, by common consent, the first 2 or 3 were a little bit not great.
Yeah, the sound took a while.
Yeah,
the sound took a while to kick in, but once it did,
it was just. I saw it described in the Evening Standard as, was this the best rock gig ever? And I saw them at Earl's Court in '75. And I'm just, you know, as somebody who's loved their music for so long, I just was so pleased I was at the O2. And as it put it to bed now, I mean, seriously, do you think...
As I often say, it's given the Led Zeppelin story, you know, a relatively happy ending, which I think it needed because, again, as I talked earlier about it being cut off in his prime, it was great that everybody could come back together for one night only and just say, this is what we did. Yes, it would have been very easy, and I know Jimmy and Jonesy wanted to carry on and Jason, but Robert Plant is his own man. You know, he's got... at the time, he had the Alison Krauss thing going on, which was obviously hugely successful. So for him, you know, he probably didn't need it as much as the others did, and I think I wouldn't rule out that they all came back together for the right reason in some way at some point, but I can't see, you know, it being on a regular basis. I think the thing is, had they gone on a tour, you know, you get to the 30th gig, and it's not as special as the first, is it? You know, I think there's been a lot of reunion tours, and it's always good to see bands come back together, but, you know, for Zeppelin, it made the legacy still untouched, didn't it? It didn't blemish it in any way. It only added to it, because for one night only, people could see that this thing was something special. I mean, when I did Kashmir,
well, you've hit the nail on that.
It was as good as Kashmir could ever be at any point.
Yes.
You know, and that, to be able to pull that out, I mean, that took the roof off. And I remember I bumped in, just afterwards, a bit of a name drop here, I bumped into Noel Gallagher, and you know, I said to him, what do you think? He said, Kashmir. And he used a swear word after that, as he would. But, you know, it's guys like that you think, well, you know, if it's hit them, you know, it's going to hit a lot of people. And again, as I said, they did have an enormously not to lose. Had it not have been as good as it was, and it was, I think anyone who was there, and anyone who's seen the YouTube clips, and I'm sure one day it'll be out officially on a DVD, and it doesn't really matter when, because people will buy it whenever it comes. It was one of the iconic gigs, and, you know, you had all these people from different, you know, nationalities come together who've been in the ballot and won the tickets. You know, I've never experienced anything like it, you know, and I don't think I ever will again, because it was just one of those nights. And you talk about it, you know, being lucky enough to be there as you and I were, and to other people, they probably think, well, yeah, it was something special. But to be there, it was almost indescribable, because it was something special.
I think the moment Kashmir to me was like the moment, and I've taken that away, and thanks very much. And if they never play together again,
obviously we're very lucky we were there. But I think it only added to the legacy, and I think people, and it looks so right. I mean, these guys are in their 60s, you know, but it didn't look like, you know, old guys trying to reclaim former glories. It looked like, you know, musicians that still had the skill, the verve, and everything else, and the passion that made Led Zeppelin what it was. And as I said, as long as rock music's played, Led Zeppelin will be right there at the top.
Marvellous to speak to you, Dave. Thank you very much for your time.
Been a pleasure. Dave
Lewis, and another author for you next week on the programme. Books on a Tuesday evening. Dave, a renowned author on the subject of Led Zeppelin, and great to talk to him. Hi, Vic, being with you. Brilliant show.